of Mother Sue, and that is the Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi, who reportedly has won for the first time a seat in the Burmese parliament. Our guest is Peter Popham, author of the new biography, The Lady in the Peacock, The Life of Aung San Suu Kyi. As a foreign correspondent commentator for The Independent of London, he has visited Burma a number of times undercover. He was deported, and he met with Suu Kyi 2 times. I wanted to go back how Burma was established and what that had to do with Aung San Suu Kyi's father, Aung San.
Well, it became a British colony rather late, much later than India. It wasn't fully brought into the British Empire until 1886. And they resisted furiously being incorporated into the empire. The British deposed the monarchy and sent the king and his queen into exile. And they were faced with popular revolts from very early on, and throughout the early 20th century, there was a wave after wave of rebellion against British rule. And then in the 1940s, the Japanese came over and, with the help of Aung San Suu Kyi's father, managed to drive the British out and established their rule, which was initially seen by Aung San and his colleagues as a liberation. They discovered quite fast that it was nothing of the sort, and so he swapped sides, went back onto the British side, and helped the British to drive the Japanese out. He played an extremely clever, agile game, and at the end of it, he was left as much the strongest person and the most popular political figure in the country, and he went to negotiate Burma's independence.
Forced the independence of Burma from Britain.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was 1947-48. Britain was essentially bankrupt after the war, and was divesting of colonies as fast as possible. India went, Burma was bound to follow. So, I mean, there is a kind of inevitability about it, but he was in the right place to take over.
How did Aung San die?
He was machine gunned to death, along with a number of his colleagues, by a jealous Burmese politician who arranged the assassination.
Aung San Suu Kyi, his daughter, one of 3 children, was 2 years old. Explain what Aung San meant to Aung San Suu Kyi when she returned to Burma, not planning to be a political leader, but to take care of her mother in 1988.
Well, I mean, for her, as for the rest of the country, he was kind of a symbol of Burma's unfulfilled hopes, because he'd attempted to create a federal structure, to bring the ethnic minorities, of which there are many, many in Burma, particularly around the borders. He aimed to stitch it together into a federal structure, so all the minorities would have an important say in the way they ran their own affairs. After he was assassinated, this particular plan disappeared, and after a chaotic 10-year experience with democracy, democracy was also thrown overboard, and the military took over. So when his daughter came back in 1988, the country had been ruled by the army for a generation, and very, very badly ruled. I mean, they'd imposed a kind of primitive socialism on the economy, impoverishing what had been a very promising a new independent state, and completely eliminating all traces of democracy. So, although she didn't say much in the first months, there's no doubt that she was appalled and in despair, really, about the state her country had been reduced to. And so for her, as for her people, Aung San, long dead, was the symbol of the way things should change.
And how the people of Burma embraced Aung San Suu Kyi, and then talk about the role of the monks.
Yeah, well, I mean, they embraced her because she looked a lot like her father, because she was strikingly beautiful, and at the same time had this kind of fragility about her, which made people feel very kind of tender towards her. She wasn't a great orator, and she really isn't a great orator even now. But she showed great energy, and she threw herself into the task of leading the country. And quite rapidly she became regarded as the legitimate successor of her father, and so the person who had the right to take over.
The significance of the international movements to free Burma, and especially going after the corporations that were profiting off of the military regime, if you could talk about that corporate history, companies, for example, like Unocal.
Well, it was this terrible massacre we were discussing earlier, in which up to sort of 8,000 unarmed demonstrators were killed in 1988 on the streets of Rangoon, provoked the West, the US and many European countries to clamp sanctions onto Burma as a sign of disapproval, and basically put relations with the country on ice. And that's the way they've remained since. And the US, taking the lead very often, has tightened sanctions when as has happened frequently, the regime has once again shown its very intolerant face. And these have been controversial because it's argued by some people that as a result of the sanctions, Burma has not received enough international aid and the economy remains completely stagnant. And so a lot of business figures and their spokespeople have been urging sanctions to be removed for a number of years.
In the lead-up to this election, Aung San Suu Kyi took to the streets to call on the military to play a stabilizing role in Burma's historic transition to democracy.
I think there's a need for the participation of the military for the stability of the transformation period of our country. If the military and the people do unite together for the sake of our country, we can reach the development of our country in a very short time.
That was Aung San Suu Kyi translator. Peter Popham talk about the role that Aung San Suu Kyi sees for the military and who the current leader is.
Well, the military removed itself formally from power after 2008 with the bringing in of a civilian constitution. But they're still there. They've simply changed their clothes. And the president of the country, Thein Sein, is a former general, and so are most of his closest colleagues. The military also have 25% unelected seats in Parliament, guaranteed, and there's a Defence Council which sits above Parliament and has the right to dissolve it and to clamp martial law on the country at any time. So it's as a democracy, it's in a state of development, but it's not there yet. But Suu, partly because her father founded the army, and partly because she is proceeding with extreme caution and prudence at the moment, makes it clear that she doesn't want the army to go back to barracks and simply disappear. She's managed to forge a very strong and productive alliance with President Thein Sein, who is a genuine reforming figure. And so she is now proceeding softly, softly in the direction of a fuller democracy.
Over the weekend, Aung San Suu Kyi said her party will continue to campaign despite what she called irregular activities during the election.
I've been saddened by the fact that the government and the Elections Commission have not been as firm as they might have been with regard to the irregular and at times illegal activities that have been taking place.
So these elections were monitored by some 150 international observers. How free and fair were they, and where does the country go from here? What does it mean, as we wrap up, that Aung San Suu Kyi has won for the first time a seat in the parliament?
I think that there were irregularities, but they were very minor irregularities compared to the grotesque stitch-up, which was the last election in November 2010. The polls seem to have been counted fairly, and the result is one that nobody could argue with. Where we go next is there's a general election in 2015, and what happens between now and then is really anybody's guess. Suu will be in Parliament, as will more than 40 of her colleagues. What they will do there remains to be seen. Whether it's been hinted that she could be offered a job in the cabinet, she could be offered the job of education or health minister, foreign minister. It's even been suggested prime minister. She has kept her cards pretty pretty hidden, so we don't know how she feels about this. Some people say it would be a disaster for herself to align herself so openly with the regime at this point. On the other hand, she's nearly 67, and what she wants to do with her life is to change Burma. She's never had any interest in being an icon for the sake of being an icon. She wants to make her country better.
Why did you call the book The Lady in the Peacock?
The peacock is the symbol of the NLD. There's a stylized peacock known in Burma as the fighting peacock, which was originally a symbol of the royal family. During the revolt against the colonialists, it became a symbol of rebellion. And then in 1988, when her party was founded, they adopted this very kind of powerful image as the party's symbol.
And her name, Aung San Suu Kyi. Aung San, her father's name.
Yeah.
And when you talk about her, you refer to her as Sue.
Well, when you meet her, she always says, "Call me Sue," because she knows that her name is complicated and mysterious to foreigners, and she's a very straightforward and informal person. So I've preferred to stick simply to Sue during the book.
Do you think we'll be seeing a President Aung San Suu Kyi soon?
I don't think it's beyond the bounds of possibility.
I want to thank you very much, Peter Popham, for joining us, author of the new book, The Lady in the Peacock, The Life of Aung San Suu Kyi. Aung San Suu Kyi has just won a seat in the Burmese parliament, and we will continue to cover what happens in Burma. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.